all the way my Savior leads me. Cheers each winding path I tread, gives me grace for every trial, feeds me with the living bread.
Good morning. Welcome to the Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. Clint Davis, your host. Thank you for being with us back together after a week of vacation. 1 Samuel chapter 14, pick this up in verse 24. Interesting story of how Saul makes a rash vow that has negative consequences, particularly for his son Jonathan, and has difficult negative consequences for the relationship between Saul and Jonathan, and Saul and the people of God. And so let's pick this story up in verse 24 of 1 Samuel 14. I'm not going to read the entirety of this section, but we'll read parts of it. And the men of Israel had been hard-pressed that day, so Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. Now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping. But no one dared put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father's charge to the people with the oath. So he took the tip of his staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Then one of the people said, "Your father strictly charged the people with an oath, cursed be the man who eats food this day." And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because of the taste of this honey? How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found, for now the defeat of the Philistines has not been great." So Saul makes this decision in response to a situation where he feels like he has not been treated very well with reference to his people. Jonathan brings great defeat on the Philistines. Saul does not get the credit for that defeat, and so Saul is angry and upset. He wants to be avenged by the sword against the Philistines. He wants people to say Saul had the victory, and so he says, if you don't eat until this victory and this task is done. Saul is a man whose power has gone to his head. He's trying to control the situation, kind of trying to control the men, and he wants to find a way to get this. He wants to find a way to get this victory and get all the credit for the victory. He makes this rash vow, says no one can eat until the battle's over. No one can eat until he's avenged against the enemies, against the Philistines, until the Philistines are run out of town. And Jonathan doesn't hear this charge. He doesn't hear this rule. And so Jonathan finds some honey, like any of us, sticks the staff in the honey, gets some on his hands and eats it, and gets a little bit of energy from the sugar. We know that honey does that. Hikers will often take honey sticks with them as they're hiking and take a shot of honey. That gives them an instant energy, brightens their spirit, an instant carbohydrate, an instant sugar rush, and gives them instant energy. And so what we find here is Jonathan doing the same thing that we would do, and he's looking for some energy. People say, oh my goodness, you just broke the vow. You just broke the vow. You weren't supposed to eat anything. And Jonathan said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Right? We didn't have a great victory because everybody was faint. Everybody was hungry. Nobody had fuel to go off and do the war. You know, you got to fuel the body to be successful in any kind of physical endeavor, especially war. And so they didn't fuel the body at Saul's rash command, rash vow, and Saul making a ridiculous point. So Jonathan eats. Now Jonathan's in a situation where Jonathan's going to have to die. Interestingly, Saul's rash vow not only sets his son, Jonathan, up for failure, but he also sets everyone else up for failure. Their victory is not great. But on top of that, everyone by the evening, they receive the opportunity to eat or the command to eat. They go out and eat. They slaughter animals and they eat. They eat the blood. They don't take the time to drain the blood out of the animals, which is prohibited by the law of God. You don't eat the blood. Blood is life. And so they didn't go out and take the time to drain the blood. So they've sinned against God because they're starving. Saul has set them up for this, and his rashness, his silliness, he set them up for this. And so it comes time for them to decide whether they're going to go on into battle farther. He puts the Lord to the test. He has a sacrifice. At least he does know he needs to sacrifice to God. Then he sacrifices to God in an attempt to get back in God's good graces so that God would answer the prayer and tell him whether or not he should go to battle. God doesn't answer the prayer. Then Saul decides that he is going to find a different way to figure out why God hasn't answered him. He assumes it has to do with sin. And so they cast lots, and the lot falls on Jonathan. And Saul says, "What did you do?" And Jonathan said, "I ate when I wasn't supposed to eat, but I didn't know about this." Most likely this conversation was silly, unreasonable, but I ate. And so now Saul has decided that Jonathan must die. This thing I love about Saul, he feels like he's got to honor that command, as ridiculous as it was, but now Jonathan must die because Jonathan, his son, ate when he didn't even know he wasn't supposed to eat. And so Saul says Jonathan's going to die. But I love the people of God. The Israelites said, "No, he's not. No, he's not." He had a great victory. He brought great salvation. He went out and fought the Philistines. You didn't. He brought victory. As the Lord lives, there's not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked for God this day. See, they saw God's answer to the question of delivering God's people. They saw God's answer in the work of Jonathan and his victory of the Philistines more than they did in Saul's silly, rash vow. So at this point, we see the people now have decided they're not going to follow Saul. They don't respect Saul as the head of the nation with reference to his interaction with God and his leadership of them. They are seeing God work in different ways, and they say, "No, Jonathan's not going to die." Saul has now lost the authority over the people because the people say, "This man is rash, this man is making crazy decisions, this man doesn't know what he's talking about," and Jonathan was the one who brought victory. And I think that's an interesting point and a helpful point for us. Our God is often seen, not just in our words, but how we act and how we live and how he works in our lives and in the lives of others. And when it comes to submitting to people in leadership, we look to see who is actually, quote, walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And so I think that's a wonderful point of application. The other one is don't be rash. Let's take our time. Let's trust the Lord. Let's listen to what he has to say, and let's follow him, and let's see where he's at work to determine whether or not he's with us. You guys have a great day. God bless you. See you tomorrow.
You carry me close to your heart, and surely your goodness and mercy will follow